When you look at the nutritional profile of, say, sorghum compared to other commodity crops that we commonly consume, it's shocking how much higher it is in almost every nutrient. So that was one of our big points. Like for me, I was like, okay, what do I feed my kids? I want to feed them something healthy. And then as a nurse and someone who was involved in nutrition, I was a diabetic educator working in ICU. And I was like, why isn't everybody eating this?
Welcome back to our podcast, Tasting Terroir, a journey that helps you more accurately navigate the marketing claims of better for you food by understanding the link between healthy soil and the flavor and health of your food. I'm your host, Sarah Harper. That clip was from a follow-up interview with Snacktivist Foods co-founder Joni Kindwall-Moore. Joni set out on a journey to find better snacks for her kids who had food allergies, and in the process discovered a world of, quote, oddball grains, as she calls them. Grains like millet and sorghum, which you will get to learn a lot more about in this episode. It turns out that these gluten-free ingredients can offer us all a lot, from a flavor and texture boost in our breads and crackers to health benefits and positive contributions to the health of the soil that grows our food. In our last episode, we explored whether a brand can authentically be regenerative if it doesn't really know the farmers growing its ingredients. I think you'll see in our continued discussion with Joni just why this knowledge is so important. This week, we are taking a closer look at some of the lesser-known ingredients being embraced by Joni's brand, Snacktivist, the role these ingredients play in enhancing both soil and human health, and we talk frankly about the supply chain and the food processing challenges that her brand is working so hard to overcome. Once again, I want to encourage you to claim the power that you have as consumers and use it to reward those who are working hard to create better, regeneratively grown, flavorful, healthy food. People like our next interview and, frankly, all the folks that we've been interviewing. You can find links to their online stores in each podcast episode. And with that, we'll return to our conversation with Joni and understand a little better why it's so important to know the farmers that grow your food. Well, hi, Joni. It's great to talk to you again.
You too. It's wonderful to see you.
Yeah, well, we had such a great conversation last time exploring what is regenerative and how your company is applying it and how your supply chains are doing that and how you're really working to both bring regenerative into your supply chain and be honest about it, which is so refreshing.
The honest
a unique
part
thing.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. So I wanted to follow up with you and talk more about the flavor side. And, we've talked about this podcast being Tasting Terroir and trying to understand the link between health and flavor, because those are things that consumers are really interested in, but then also linking that back to the practices and the type of farming that we know really does add certainly more nutrient density. And depending on who you are, flavor is a very subjective thing, but it makes sense, at least, that there would be a positive flavor connection to having more minerals and nutrients and things. So, one of the really unique things about what you're doing is that you're working with some really unique grains. I mean, they're not unique; they're just grains, but they're not in the supply chain.
Are.
Yeah, exactly.
They're kind of oddball grains. And yes, like they're ones that just the average American, if they're like, "Oh, what are your products made out of?" and I'm like, "Oh, millet, teff, sorghum," they're like, "What? Like, not everybody's heard of them." So
yeah, and you're very involved in the millet. Is there a millet association or organization?
Yeah, so we've just launched like our kind of public facing side of the North American Millet Alliance. And really that's just trying to create a community around this emerging category of the millets, which are, a large group. I mean, there's like 10 different species that are considered millets, even though they're not actually related species. So there's a lot of folk taxonomy and kind of like cumbersome botany that needs to be navigated here to create this category around this food group. But next year, the UN has declared UN Year of Millets. So it's a huge opportunity for us to leverage that storytelling and that narrative around what the millets are, why they're really important to global food systems moving forward, especially in the face of changing climate and a warming planet, and why they are nutritional powerhouses.
And what do they taste like? What does millet taste like?
Yeah, it's actually, they all taste very different. Proso millet is like a sweeter grain. It actually has a very nice flavor profile. And if you buy like Dave's Killer Bread or, a lot of the more healthier breads on the market actually usually do add some millet to it. It's a component in the original like Ezekiel bread, the Ezekiel recipe. And it's got a lovely flavor and texture that people really like once they try it.
And I'm sure there are all sorts of health benefits for people. Is it higher in fiber? Or does it keep its shell? It's not milled off or what?
Yeah, so it really depends on the millet that you're, focused on. Like, for instance, the Proso millet I just mentioned is kind of like a classic one that people see commonly in like bulk bins or in products. That one has to have a hard pericarp, like an actual, that has to be dehulled. It has a hull that is not digestible by humans. So that one does have to be dehulled. But then you take sorghum, which is the most commonly grown millet in our nation and in North American farming systems, and it does not need to be dehulled. So there's a lot of nuances in the processing in all these different millets.
Well, that's very cool. What made you want to go down this path of sourcing these kind of grains for your snack foods and baking mixes?
Yeah, two major things. I mean, for us, I have to say, like, my entry point was, not just out of curiosity, but out of necessity, because I was struggling to feed a family that had multiple food allergies. And we were looking for things that had high nutrient integrity, which millets by and large do. And there is some really interesting information coming out about millets and about the diverse nutrient profile that they contain. It is rather significant in that they're much superior, especially compared to rice and corn. In fact, it's shocking. The United Sorghum Association just did some really great work from a nutritional standpoint, looking at the actual just basic nutritional profile, including minerals, trace nutrient, like, the things that don't usually make it to the main frame on the back of the package. And when you look at the nutritional profile of, say, sorghum compared to other commodity crops that we commonly consume, it's shocking how much higher it is in almost every nutrient. So that was one of our big points. Like, for me, I was like, okay, what do I feed my kids? I want to feed them something healthy. And then as a nurse and someone who was involved in nutrition, I was a diabetic educator working in ICU. And I was like, why isn't everybody eating this? I mean, why is this just for gluten-free people? That doesn't make any sense. So it became kind of a personal mission for me to really kind of champion for them, not only for a nutritional, buy-in, like, hey, you're looking for more nutrition. We're trying to give people permission to love grains again, because grains have been demonized largely in American food systems for being empty calories and, fostering inflammation and all these other diseases. But when you look at millets as a whole, they're a grain group that's rather exempt from a lot of those issues. So that's one of the reasons I champion so hard for millets as a food. The other reason is when you look at agricultural systems and you look at the role that they can play in regenerative cropping systems, it's really, really significant. And sorghum is a longer season crop, so it's not as much like a crop that you're going to sneak in as a cover crop. But many of the other millets, like Proso millet, other minor millets like foxtail, pearl, many others, they fill a very vital role in cover cropping between other cash crops. And if we can add a value to those cover crops, the farmers are that much more incentivized to bring in more biodiversity to their farming system and then shift in a biomimicry way towards crops that are more naturally drought resilient. So, long answer to a short question.
No, it's very good.
All those points.
Do you know why millet wasn't developed as a mainstream grain? Is it harder to process, or what's held it back?
Yeah, so I have given this a lot of thought, and I think that there is really a nexus point between two major events in history that have made them underutilized, kind of neglected grains. First, green revolution. When you look at millets in general, they're not highly responsive to heavy chemical fertilizer regimens. And so they, compared to corn, wheat, and rice, when you looked at agronomy during the Green Revolution, where they were like, what can we pile chemicals on and get crazy yield improvements? And that was the primary crops that we see today: soy, corn, wheat, rice, etc. And these other crops just became something that didn't have a lot of exploration when it comes to genetics, and because they didn't fit the model of the Green Revolution. Secondly, which now is proving to be important, because now that chemicals are very expensive and hard to get, many nations are scrambling to go back to these non-green revolution crops, because they will still produce yields without any fertilizers added to the system or artificial irrigation. So that's one reason. Second reason, I think, is cultural, having to do with more just of like a colonial food system mindset. Like, there's a lot of racism associated with food. So when you look at, for instance, sorghum and the role that sorghum played in Africa, and when slaves were brought to the New World, they brought sorghum seeds with them. And it was a very important food group to African American early, communities in the South. And so sorghum syrup and sorghum products were commonly eaten, but I feel like it was kind of a lens of racism that they were not brought into broader food systems, because it was literally thought of as food for slave groups, which a lot of people don't like to talk about that. But I think it's really important that we're just really transparent about those conversations. Fun to talk about, but it's important to talk about.
Well, as you explore, because obviously a lot goes into making a food company and products, and you're always dealing with choices about ingredients and putting them together, and what consumers want versus also what your brand stands for. And as we talked about with regenerative and wanting to bring in this better way of growing, that's really prominent in your brand. And then you've got these great things like millet and other sorghum and other grains. But you also, of course, have to make sure it tastes good. And you're dealing with a palate that, in a large part of the mainstream public, probably isn't used to a lot of these things. So how did you go through like this product formulation path of balancing out the taste that's going to be attractive just to an average person that maybe that isn't sophisticated or, been, hardy and growing their own and, great, all stuff we should do, but most people don't, and so how do you meet those people kind of where they already are with a palate that's particularly loaded with sugar? And so everything, if it doesn't have a lot of sugar, then so how did you decide and balance all of that out in terms of ingredients you selected?
Well, it was kind of I'd have to say a bit of a rough learning curve for me, because like I came in really gung ho, like, hey, we're going to do this 100% whole grains, all this stuff. And then the early iterations, people were like, that's a little too hippie for us. Like, tone back on the granola style, like hippie food. I was like, oh, noted. So I ended up starting to make blends and blending in more things that were palatable to the typical American palate, given that most people are like, bread is white, it's bleached, it's enriched, it's tasty, it's basically flavorless. Nowadays, you look at like what, commodity like Bimbo bread, all you taste is the sweetness of the starch. And so it's really tough when that's your entry point compared to like a European market, where there's like a real market for like the old world dark breads that have super robust flavor profiles. And so that's been a challenge for me. Like, what we first brought to the market was really robust. Everything, the very first ingredient was sorghum or millet or teff of that early product line. We immediately heard from a group of moms that they were like our early adopters. And a lot of these moms were struggling to feed families that had not only food allergy issues, but behavioral spectrum of different things that they were managing, from autism to other behavioral things. And that's what led them to an allergy inclusive diet, is they had a child who's they're trying to fit this into their therapeutic regimen to help manage their behavioral condition. And so they said, hey, we need your help. We've got these kids. They'll only eat it if it's white, and they'll only eat 2 types of food a day, because that's just where they're at. So I actually did a series of blending experiments. And then I served food to all these moms and all their kids. It was the Washington Autism Society, actually, in Spokane. And they voted in what became our all-purpose flour blend, which did lead with brown rice, but still had significant levels of millet, sorghum, and teff in it.
What a great idea.
We were able to kind of blend that down. Yeah. And so we ended up, so in 2018, it kind of broke my heart because I was like, I'm all about the ancient grains. That's what I want to put out there. We did a split where it was like, okay, focaccia remained sorghum forward, millet forward. Our pancake and waffle mix remained first ingredient is teff. Still is, and that's our top selling SKU. But then we put a milder flour blend in some of our other products, like our artisan sandwich loaf, because these moms were like, it needs to taste like white bread or our kids won't eat it. What we're doing now, however, because this is years later and I now have a lot more control over our supply chain and how it tastes, which is fantastic. I can select for sorghum that has a milder flavor. I can select for millet that tastes a little sweeter. And now we're bringing back, going into 2023, starting in January, we have brand new branding, brand new packaging. And again, we're shifting our ancient grains to the top of the ingredient stack again. I think people are ready now. And I think I've gotten better at blending. I think I've gotten better at blending it. So it's like we can sneak it in as much as we can.
That's so cool. That's very cool. And when you were tasting these different ingredients to decide, what would go into them, were you able to tell a difference between places where you at least knew something about the farms? Maybe that the whole supply chain wasn't fully regenerative, but at least they had various practices that they were sticking to, and they had more knowledge about the supply chain. And then these ancient grains are just kind of a whole different supply chain bucket themselves because they're not a mainstream. But so talk a little bit about the tasting of these different, this different stream.
Yeah. So the very first ingredients that we started noticing real differences in the flavor were in the sorghum and in the millet. We have always sourced all of our teff from Mescal Teff or Teffco, which is based in Boise. And they work with a really dedicated farming group that is contemplating and shifting more and more regenerative practices, but they're just not there yet. We're offering to work with them as much as possible, but we don't have as much visibility into that supply chain because of the nature of how it comes through the market. And they have specialized milling and a facility that handles teff, which is unique. So we're not really going there with the teff. So I'm going to stay focused on more of the sorghums and the proso millet. We were sourcing proso millet from Colorado organic farmers. And we couldn't tell how regenerative they were in their practices, but we knew they were certified organic. We knew that they were using organic, biologicals for their soil health regimen and for their fertilizer inputs. And we noticed when we couldn't get millet from them and then we pulled it from commodity and it wasn't organic, I noticed a flavor change. The commodity proso millet, and it could have been a different variety too, which we didn't know because there was no transparency or provenance in that communication. Yeah. But what we got from commodity had a little bit more of a corn flavor that was a little bit more pronounced, where the organic one had a sweeter flavor without that kind of corn flavor to it. We also noticed a change in the kernel size, where the organic kernel tends to be smaller and has that sweeter flavor, where the commodity one tends to have a plumper kernel, but it's a little bit like of a more pungent flavor, also more difficult to dehull. Organic is much simpler to dehull. It goes to the dehuller with better efficiencies. So, and then in sorghum, as I mentioned, when we would get organic sorghum, it would have a sweeter flavor, where the ones that we would pull from commodity would have a more bitter flavor to it. And we were never able to figure out why or where that bitter flavor came from.
You were saying that the sorghum commodity stream wasn't always consistent, which that's the whole definition
not
of
at all.
Commodity.
Yeah, I know. And it's still not. And in fact, I actually just went and got a bunch of sorghum at a bulk bin, my local health food store bulk bin. We were doing a photo shoot. So I was like getting bulk sorghum for a video. And I took it home and I had to clean it. It had like bits of the straw and it had like chunks of stuff in it and it had rocks. I don't know how you get a rock in sorghum because sorghum is like 8 feet tall. I was like, how are there rocks in here? And I was like, boy, the commodity side of sorghum is struggling to meet those consistencies. And I think it's because it doesn't have the spec sheet control that, say, wheat does, where wheat flour standards, barley flour standards are strictly enforced by huge industry players that actually force them to farm a certain way to meet a certain spec sheet that's somewhat artificially fabricated through industrial chemical farming practices. But it holds that segment of the commodity market hostage and farming the way it does, which is not regenerative or organic. So it's a fascinating process as we kind of unpack this whole industry. And it's kind of fun working in the Wild West with these oddball grains that nobody really cares about because no one's set a standard for what the spec sheet should look like yet in these crops. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a great way to like create a new category around rather unknown crops and bring them in as being like from the beginning, they could come in as like part of their value proposition is that they lean really well into organic and regenerative farming systems, and that's part of their value.
Yeah, well, and that brings around, since we're talking about sorghum, one of my favorite things, absolute favorite things, is when two really good people that I happen to get to know or work with end up working with each other. And so I know Clint Brower, and we featured him in the podcast on with the robots, and he's growing sorghum, among other things.
Yes.
And so I was thrilled that you let people know that you're gonna be sourcing some sorghum from them.
Yeah. We're so excited about that project because I've known Clint for a few years now. You know, we've been talking through this whole process of how we can work together, like how Snacktivist could be one of the path to market partners for Greenfield and their farmers who are using Greenfield robotics, so that those farmers who are investing in regenerative have a market to sell into that's not just commodity, that will allow them to tell their story and have that farmer soil connection and that provenance piece in place. So we wanted to do it last year, but the sorghum didn't turn out quite like we wanted it to. And but this year we actually, despite crazy, terrible weather in his part of the world, we have a beautiful sorghum crop. So this is Clint's sorghum.
That's amazing.
And this weekend, I'm going to be running it through our little mill. We do have a small mill at our facility. Nothing that we would do on commercial scale, but it's awesome for small scale stuff.
This episode brought to you by the Global Food and Farm community, globalfoodandfarm.com. A private online space where farmers, chefs, emerging food entrepreneurs, and conscious consumers learn about and apply the latest science behind building healthier soils for a healthier world. Members also gain access to help with their marketing and communication efforts through our Grounded Growth Paddock, featuring DIY instructional videos and joint marketing projects that are designed to help small businesses find an audience for the better products they are making. The community provides new original content to members each week in the form of video interviews, scholarly articles, and the chance to ask Dr. Jill Clapperton any questions you may have each week. To get a free online tour of our digital streaming library and learn more about how this amazing resource community can help your business grow, contact me, Sarah Harper, at Sarah, S-A-R-A, at Global Food and Farm, all spelled out, GLOBALFOODANDFARM.com.
Because we're doing all kinds of fun stuff with sorghum, not only just flouring it and using it as a flour in our baked products, but we also have a whole cool R&D pipeline for other sorghum products that I can't really talk about, but very cool, exciting stuff. So we love the fact that there's no gross stuff on that sorghum. The robots did all the weeding, so we didn't have to pour a bunch of chemicals on them.
And
they have some pretty tough weeds.
Yes.
And no till. And
wee.
exactly. Because that's one of the things we're always up against with regenerative is, and I'm a huge proponent of regenerative because I have a heart for transitional agricultural systems. It's like drug addiction. You can't just say, well, stop doing your drugs tomorrow, guys. It'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not going to work that way. We have to have a transitional piece. And with the goal, in my mind, getting to a point where we don't have dependency on chemical inputs any longer. And even in fantastic regenerative systems, we still do have a lot of glyphosate dependency. We still have a lot of, and I'm all for technologies that can help us get that extra mile and eliminate those chemicals from those systems whenever possible.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
so I love the work Clint's doing.
That's a huge missing piece. I mean, I've talked about this with probably everybody, and I'll just admit I probably always will, because my heart burns when I think of this, that there are all these people marketing about regenerative, and there are a number of large scale companies that even have their own mills or have their own, the ability to process. Some of them have mills in the name, I'll just say. But so they could do it. They could absolutely do it. And in a way that wouldn't add a whole lot of cost. And they're not. And yet, people like you, people like Jennifer Coer, small brands and farmers like the Axons who are becoming a brand, becoming a mill themselves, you are the linchpin. I mean, it's great to have some transitional grace for these farmers, but there's nowhere for it to go. There's no difference. And without a brand to bring it through and to capture that value. And, I'm kind of jaded by, I started out too naive and then I turned too jaded. So that's a problem, my own problem. But
well, I have that problem too sometimes. So you're in good company, Sarah.
But, I look at what the trajectory they're on, and it seems to me that there's just a push to try to, sprinkle in a few things and call the whole existing system regenerative. Like that's the path.
Oh yeah.
That's the path that they would like to be on. So they don't have to change any of the efficiency, don't have to change, and get this whole big PR boost for the whole existing system, which is so far away from what the farmers that we talk to and that we work with are doing.
It's so frustrating because I feel like you'll hear this, like I'll read a press release and, here we just had the whole big USDA Climate Smart Ag grant go through, and some of these large corporations, and they're like, oh, yay, we got $100 million and we're going to do this. And I'm like, and we're going to be regenerative. I'm like, guys, have you not been reading the agriculture books the last 50 years? We already have been doing that. It's called conservation agriculture, and that's not regenerative. That's just one tool in the shed that plays into what regenerative is. And I feel like that reductionistic mindset of okay, we checked that box, now we're regenerative is a dangerous thing. I'm glad these big companies are at least doing that. Yay, hooray for them. We need that. But should we pay them $200 million to do that? No, their farmers could be saving money by doing that, which means they could be saving money by doing that. And they're already profitable. So a lot of really fantastic smaller organizations and companies that did put in for that grant didn't get it because they were already doing the good work. And
it is, the story. I used to work on climate policy, 20 years ago, climate and ag policy on Capitol Hill in the Senate. And then, with environmental groups and farmers. And that was the most maddening part of it all, that people who with a straight face care about the environment so passionately that they will exclude the people that already did it. And because we have to get additionality, we can't credit anybody that's already done it. And not letting it sink in at all. The message that sends, the undermining of all the first movers, of all those people that pointed at them and said, you're stupid, you're taking too much risk, you're never going to get paid for that. You just made them right, by
exactly.
That helpful little technical policy.
Right. and what's crazy to me, in addition to that is some of the, applicants that I know that did not get awarded, some of them were, they were already doing the good work. So it wasn't a matter of convincing farmers to transition. A lot of these particular grants were working on growing the market channels to get these products to market through novel channels. And again, this is where I think the USDA made a big mistake, is that I feel, and granted, this is just my lens into the people I've spoken to, I could be wrong, but that they didn't put enough value on that market growing focus, where they were like, A, let's prioritize getting more farmers to start trying to do this or thinking about it. And B, let's really put a lot of money towards validating carbon sequestration data. Like any grant proposal that had that carbon piece in it seemed to get funded a lot faster than the other ones that were like, let's try to create market segments and market pull for the farmers who are already doing it. That just was down the triage list apparently for the USDA, which I think is really tragic because, I mean, in my position, I have way more farmers that want to sell to us than we can possibly move to market. And if we could have, with our partners that we applied for the grant with, had we gotten that money, we could have built a more robust, kind of a market pull that would have helped get a lot of this product to market.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like when I started Grounded Growth and we had wheat growers all over the US and Canada and all varieties, and we were talking with a number of different potential big millers, and we could have put together a regenerative flour supply chain easily. Yeah. And, but guess what? They don't want to pay anymore. So what is the reason to aggregate all of that? And it's the same old answer, like, well, we need to get the market started first. And then, we need to prove the concept. And then, that would be fine as long as the then part kicked in and money did actually come back down the chain, which it hardly ever does,
Especially when you're dealing with big, huge brands, like the big guys that got a huge chunk of money out of this grant program. We already know it's very rare that they're going to have any sort of trickle down cash effect that it ends up reaching the end producers, because that's not how their business model is structured, and it never has been. I highly doubt they're going to be able to change that mid-flight when they're running billion-dollar-a-year companies that are global. Like, you don't change your business model overnight. It just doesn't work like that. But unfortunately, a lot of the organizations and entities that do have that built into their business model just weren't selected for the grant. Bummer.
Well, I mean, the good news about all of this is that consumers have a tremendous amount of power in the market, and increasingly they are getting more opportunities to vote with that dollar in ways that really matter. And especially, I love that you guys are on Thrive Market, because that's a nice online store that already has a lot of customers looking for better food and done in a responsible way. And so that they can find you easily there is
they're fantastic. So I mean, Thrive, honestly, like they put their mouth, they do their walking with their talking, which is fantastic, because I'm finding that most retailers don't. Like, I'll go to a retailer that I'm like, we've submitted our product line to multiple times, don't even get a call back. And then you go to their website and they're bragging about how they're the leaders of working with brands that are doing regenerative. And I'm like, well, that's funny, because you don't even bother calling us back. And we're one of the only ones in the grain sector that focus on regenerative and focus on climate resistant crops as a focus, which that's a big freaking deal. And I'm like, come on now, guys, really? Like, I get with it. It irritates me, because as a little brand, like, we would love to grow and be able to drop our prices along with our volumes, but you can't do that when you're coming in as a very small brand. You don't have that luxury, and it's not because we're making a lot of profit. It's because you're not competitive yet. So you have to come in at kind of an ultra premium positioning. So we're hopeful that as we grow our product lines to leave the baking mix set. I mean, we never started our company to be a baking mix company. We started it to make great grain-based foods out of different grains, unique ancient grain blends. And eventually we'll be back, we're launching our frozen lines, our pizza crust and brownie bites. And we have some fantastic snack lines that we're piloting and hoping to launch in the coming years. But, without the business from retailers, we're at a standstill. I mean, we're literally contingent on retailers listening to us to even have a chance, which is a bummer, because when you're a little brand from Idaho, they don't really care. They're like, Idaho, where's that? Ohio? Like, I literally will argue with people that they're like, you're in the Midwest. I'm like, no, we're in the Northwest. They're like, but Idaho is in the Midwest. I'm like, no, Idaho's in the Northwest. Like, really?
Yeah. But they've thoroughly checked their supply chains for regenerative. I'm sure.
Clearly Literally, they do.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'm like, I can give you the phone numbers of like 5 of our farmers if you'd like to talk to them.
Yeah.
But you know what we're doing, Sarah, and I'm really excited about this is, because we have been really hit and miss, like we'd be like, oh, cool, we can buy this. We do our purchasing with our co-packer as a partner. He's fantastic. It helps us solve some of our cash flow needs. And he's just a dedicated, amazing human. But, and so that makes it cumbersome as well, because it's not just us and vertically integrated as us in partnership with co-packers, et cetera. And one of the things we're doing to help combat that need for transparent storytelling in the supply chain is we are releasing a QR code that will be live on our packaging as of like January 1st, where you will be able to go in, and it won't take you to our website like most QR codes do. It'll take you to a world where you can end up at our website if you want to learn more about our products and you want to buy from us online. But it will also allow you to navigate into a world where you can go to the field where the millet was grown, or to the field and there's Clint's robots out there whacking down the weeds, or, me sitting down with Farmer Steve and he's talking about his garbanzos and why he is an early adopter of Regenerative, where he lives in Nebraska and where they're dealing with intense drought. And those are the stories that we need to tell. And then from our operational standpoint, because we're not a huge brand, we can only buy so much. We only have our farmers grow so much if they're growing for us. So when we run out, we'll be out until the next year. And so if that happens with that QR code being what it is, we can say, hey guys, here's what now we're planting with 3 more farmers, meet them. Here's farmer, Deanna, and here's farmer, John and whatever. And they're planting for us. And by next fall, you'll be able to taste it in these products. And it kind of brings them into a community experience rather than this static supply chain, which is not realistic.
Yeah. Well, and it really lives up to your name. It lets your consumers be snacktivists, be actual activists in the best sense of doing something positive to make the change that they want.
Yeah. Right. And, and then it'll be cool to hear the stories from these farmers, especially farmers who are really in precarious positions where they don't have access to irrigation. They're significantly strained by drought, and the fact that they're shifting to really drought resilient grains is one of their only life-saving measures of keeping the farm. That's something I'm really passionate about. And a lot of farmers have already lost everything, having to cut down orchards in California because they've lost irrigation. They're sitting there on fallow ground. The dust is blowing away. They're going to have to turn their backs on their farms and walk away. And we're like, no, you don't. You can grow posto millet for us. You can grow triticale. Let's figure out a way to make a great triticale cracker. Let's partner with like California Wheat Commission. They already know how to do it. Like, we can add value to these crops that desperately play a role in a changing climate and the face of agriculture. It's just that no one's doing the work to do it, and then investors are scared to touch it because they're like, boy, that's risky. I'm like, yeah, but it's the most freaking important thing you could do. Come on.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
You want your grandkids to eat?
I'm so glad you mentioned California Wheat Commission and our dear friend Claudia Carter. She's fantastic. She is amazing.
I know. I love her.
And she's helped a number of members in our network. Helped Jen Coer find her mill to do rice milling and help just explain the whole industry side to the farmers in our group that often are just in the dark about that, and they need to know it if they're going to have to move into that space to get their better stuff to market. So yeah, I can't say enough about her. In fact, it reminds me I need to get her on the podcast too. But
I know you totally do. It's an interesting world we're all navigating, because like we're kind of building the parachute on the way down, but like someone who believes in future generations, someone's got to do it, and it's not going to be easy, but I am confident enough that we can shift our food systems to where our grandkids and great grandkids will have food on the plate, and we can feed the world against some pretty dire circumstances. But we have to change now, and we have to put our money where our mouth is, and get serious and be collaborative and work together as a team to get it done. Yeah.
Well, and that's what our global food and farm community is about too, trying to bring those people together and help each other and help consumers to have a hub to find, find these different people.
Totally. So important.
I know you probably have to go, but I do want to ask you about, just as you think about the flavor of place, do you think that you can taste place? I mean, I know it's It's not a
Yes, we
scientifically
can.
settled question at all, but you're working with all sorts of different places that you know where they're coming from. So do you
Hmm.
have any
Hmm.
experience with having different tastes based on where it's coming from?
We don't have enough data yet with our crops that we're working on to really have like a microclimate terroir type of a focus. Like my suspicion is that it will happen. My suspicion is that it will not only be reflective of actual geographical location and soil type, but it will also be highly reflective of the actual rotational systems and the rhizosphere ecology that we have. Because we know it's the rhizosphere ecology that drives a lot of the presence of the secondary, tertiary metabolites that plants make that are largely responsible for flavor. And we do know that that is also a potential driver in metabolites that have certain functional properties that we're really interested in, like, for instance, the antioxidants and phytonutrients that are present in sorghum that are not only antioxidants, but have microbiome conditioning properties that are now being validated and proven in the lab, like University of Nebraska-Lincoln and in Benson's lab. They're actually starting to prove that, yes, these metabolites like positively affect the gut microbiome. What we don't know is what's driving presence of those metabolites, like what key component of either the variety of the sorghum or the farming system or the rhizosphere ecology, what's setting that up to make that perfect storm happen. And so to add in the flavor nuance to that is like a whole nother thing that's going to be like transformational in the next few years as we start to get enough data to really like pull that all together. But there's a fantastic baker by the name of Sean Duffy, and he's the head baker at the Grain Shed in Spokane, Washington. And he works with a group of farmers, but mostly farmer Don Schuerman out of Palouse country in Eastern Washington. And they have taken the terroir of these wheats down to the hillside. And it's, when you taste the breads that they make, it's like a whole nother world of bread making. It's like the wine, it's the fine wine of the grain sector. Mm-hmm. And I'm confident we'll also find that in the grains that we're working with too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's part of why I wanted to name the podcast Tasting Terroir, because it isn't just wine. Yeah. It is in a lot of different crops. And especially as we know more about the varieties, the place, the practices, and that can only come from knowing the supply chain, and that's the thing.
Exactly.
And that's what will make it more valuable in the marketplace, just as certain wines are more valuable for the exact type of grape and place and all that data information that then fuels the story too.
Yeah, we're just going to be working independently to gather as much of that data as we can. I know Martin Gorder, our North Dakota farmer, he's biodynamic, he's regenerative, he's organic. He grew Proso millet, a small kind of a test plot of Proso for us this year. And we are going to he just sent in the soil samples. And then we're sending that off to Bionutrient Association and Bionutrient Institute to get some actual quantitative data on nutrient density there as well. So as this all comes together, the work at Audacity with Eric and Jill and like all these different people, we're going to build a database that's going to give us actual data sets that drive our food system towards quality and change the narrative, because our food system has been only driven by quantity. And we have abandoned not only flavor and terroir, but the medicinal properties that used to be naturally occurring in our food. And we've actually selected our food system away from medicinal properties. And that's why food's no longer medicine and food's killing us. So we've got to bring that back, and flavor is going to be a huge driver.
Yeah. I'm so excited to see all these different pieces coming together across our network. And I'm convinced that, these are the people that are really going to be paving the way for a much better food system. So
absolutely. And, when we have all that data in place, I can taste something and I don't need data to convince me. I'm like, this is better. But a lot of people do, and industry does, and policy does. And so it's really important that we develop a body of basically evidence-based practice guidelines for growing nutrient-dense regenerative foods. And so I'm really grateful to all the work that's being done to everyone out there, so that we have lots of options to quantify this moving forward.
Well, that is great. Thank you so much for spending so much time. And I have to compliment you all your understanding of agronomy and the rhizosphere. I mean, I venture to guess that there are very few food brand owners that even know what half those things are, let alone fluent in them. So it's a really
I was a soil scientist for a couple of years, like a grunt. So I know just enough to be dangerous.
Well, that's wonderful.
But I did work in the labs of Dr. Tom DeLuca at University of Montana for a couple of years, and I collected thousands of soil samples and ran them in the lab. So again, I know just enough to be dangerous, but it's also enough to really load a different level of appreciation for how that affects food.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tom. Those were really formative years.
Well,
cool.
Good. Well,
awesome, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks you,
for having
Joni,
me.
and best of luck.
Yeah, always so much fun to get caught up with you. Thanks for doing the awesome work of advocating and getting the community rallied. And I just love the work that you and Jill are doing. So, Dr. Clapperton,
thank
Sarah,
you.
Keep up the awesome work.
Okay.
Love you guys.
All right, we will. Okay.
All right, take care.
You've been listening to Tasting Terroir, a podcast made possible by a magical collaboration between the following companies and supporters, all working together to help farmers, chefs, food companies, and consumers to build healthier soil for a healthier world. Rhizoterra. Owned by Dr. Jill Clapperton, Rhizoterra is an international food security consulting company providing expert guidance for creating healthy soils that yield tasty, nutrient-dense foods. Check us out at rhizoterra.com. That's RHIZOTERRA.com. And the Global Food and Farm online community, an ad-free global social network and soil health streaming service that provides information and connections that help you apply the science and practice of improving soil health. Join us at globalfoodandfarm.com. And from listeners like you who support us through our Patreon account at patreon.com/tastingterroir. Patrons receive access to our full-length interviews and selected additional materials. Patrons will also have the opportunity to submit questions that we will answer on the podcast. Tune in next week to hear more interviews and insights with myself, Sarah Harper, and Dr. Jill Clapperton, as well as the regenerative farmers, chefs, and emerging food companies in the Global Food and Farm online community and beyond. If you like our work, please give us a 5-star rating and share the podcast with your friends. Thanks so much for listening and for helping us get the word out about this new resource to taste the health of your food. Until next week, stay curious, keep improving, and don't stop believing that better is possible when knowledge is available.